Well, we started meeting when you were in the middle of going through seminary, and so I got to be, along with our other friend Jessica, the beneficiary of all this knowledge that was getting poured into her, which then she started pouring into us, which just blew our minds in so many ways and ended up being just such an incredible blessing. And so one of the first things we did was we read a book by Carolyn James, and I just remember that blowing things wide open. She started talking about things like we are theologians, and I thought, well, what in the world does that have to do with me? That meant old guys in a seminary to me. That never gets applied to a woman, much less a young mom. And she started talking about this word Ezer that we're going to talk about tonight, and what does that mean? Where does that show up in the Bible? I've never heard of that before. So I really, that was a time in my life where faith just kind of blew wide open, even though I'd been a Christian since I was a child. And it was a really exciting time, and I think that's why this topic of identity is so exciting to me, because when we stop talking to women only based on their roles, and we can start to really talk about this foundation of being a follower of Christ, and what does that really look like, it opens up so much more for us. It gives us freedom, it gives us clarity about who we are, how we're supposed to live our lives. And I just remember the time that we were meeting, I was pregnant with Olivia, so this is my third, and by this time, I had gotten so tired of people only talking to me about being a mother. Like, in the beginning, it's exciting and it's great, and we're all talking about kids because we don't know what we're doing, and but about 3 years in, I wanted somebody to talk to me about more than just how to apply the Bible based on motherhood. And so I just was aching for some real biblical truth about what is it I'm supposed to be doing, how am I supposed to be living. So I really want to dig in to what God says at the very beginning about us. So in Melissa Kruger's article, she set up just this beautiful illustration of how Eve in the garden is created perfectly. She's in perfect communion with God. She has this perfect identity, and then we get to this fallen identity based on her disobedience and reaching out for something that God had not given her, and her desire to have something outside of what God had provided in the garden. And so we're going to camp out there again tonight, just in a different way, because when we first see women come onto the scene in the biblical narrative is in Genesis 2. And we hear this, we've heard this story a lot, but I think that we're going to be able to break it apart in a way that maybe a lot of women haven't heard yet. So I want to mention that Christy Cole wrote a beautiful, she did a great job with this topic. So we're going to leave plenty for y'all to dig into as you're reading through. But she says this in the very beginning. Many of us struggle to find clarity and freedom around the topic of identity, what it means to be a woman created in the image of God, and how to live that out in our daily lives and circumstances. Is there something transcendent, something beyond role, personality type, specific skill set that defines us and gives our lives direction, meaning, value, and purpose? So tonight we're talking about this thing that transcends so much of the way we communicate with each other, whether it's based on our roles or looking to personal gifts or spiritual gifts, all those sorts of things, how we relate to each other. This is something that actually transcends all of that, and is the same for all of us. So that foundational truth is found in Genesis 2, and I'm going to read that the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." Now out of the ground the Lord had formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called every living creature, that was his name. The man gave names to all livestock and to the birds of the heavens and to every beast of the fields. But for Adam, there was not found a helper fit for him. So we go in the narrative to everything's good in creation. It's good. And then we get to it's not good for Adam to be alone. And we get to this term of helper fit. Yeah. And we've heard a lot about that.
We have heard a lot about that
over the years.
Yeah.
And everything from helpmate, helpmeet, and we want to kind of break up tonight. What does that really mean?
Right.
Because that Hebrew term is a lot more robust, I think, right? Than what the English would translate to. So how do we pronounce this word, first of all?
Ezer. It's Ezer.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's important as we move into a conversation about Ezer is to recognize that Adam's aloneness, God says is not good. Yeah. And so the creation of Eve, she was not an accessory.
Right.
She was not a frivolous add-on.
Right.
But that she was critical to the mission that God wanted humanity to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And so how she was going to come alongside Adam and her participation was going to be critical, mission critical. Eve was not an afterthought. She was not plan B. She was not, oh, this might be fun to give him somebody to, clean his house. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was critical to what God wanted to accomplish.
Yes, and that man and woman together were the complete reflection of,
Absolutely.
Of being made in God's image.
Right.
So this term is found 21 times in the Bible.
Right.
There's 2 in the Genesis narrative, specifically referring to women. There are 3 used as a military term, and it's used 16 times where God identifies himself as Ezer.
Yeah.
And so, this is what ended up blowing my mind. I had never heard about this. The very word that God uses to describe us in Genesis, when we come on the scene before the fall, before he's even created Eve, he says, I will make. Mm-hmm. He's given her this name, Ezer. And it's the very word that he uses to describe himself as Israel's helper. I've got some examples here from the Psalms. Psalm 33:20 says, our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. Psalm 75 says, I am afflicted and needy. Hasten to me, O God. You are my help and my deliverer. Psalm 146:5 says, blessed is he whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in his God. So why do you think this is not something that we talk about or are taught about?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think for a long time, women were taught that there were certain assignments given to Eve that were born out of the English word helper.
Yeah.
But what's funny is so many of those assignments that we think of when we've maybe initially heard the word, Eve wasn't doing. Eve had no house to clean. Eve had no laundry to do. So some of those tasks that we tend to assign to what we assume the Genesis text is saying didn't even exist in the garden.
Yeah.
So then, okay, if we set those things aside, what we realize when we look at that original Hebrew word is there is so much more. We have minimized the word. We've done disservice. And certainly caring for a home is one way that many women help and serve and come alongside their husbands.
Yeah.
So I don't want to, minimize that because that's, in different seasons of life, that sometimes is our primary task.
Yes.
But to make an assumption that is all it is,
the only thing.
The Hebrew word implies so much more because it is how God describes himself as the helper of his people,
Yeah.
especially in times of distress.
Yeah.
So,
it's so awesome. Well, and I think you just touched on like the broadness of this term. You know, when God says this, he hasn't created her yet. She hasn't been given in marriage to Adam yet. You know, there's so much wide open for her to step in and be a helper in need, but not in strict kind of parameters.
Right.
You know, Carolyn, in the book we read by Carolyn James, she says, you know, why is it that, you know, when we're talking about God as Ezer, it's a strong, very strong helper, shield, defender. But then when we apply that word to women, we end up talking about making babies and, you know, and kind of like you're saying, cleaning the house, and does not, this definition of what Ezer is, does that not apply to us as well, just as it applies to God? Maybe not exactly in that perfect way, but you know, there is just such this. There's not all these restrictions that we want to put on it,
right?
And it leaves it open for the Lord to lead us in the ways that He wants us to be serving and helping and standing in the gap for women. And I love that. Let's talk about Christy touches, and I think it's important that she touches on how that Ezer isn't defined by marriage, and that you know, women, whether married or single, reflect the Ezer nature of God,
right.
and that we need to we kind of need to, I don't know, what would you say, that we would we need to broaden that up a little bit to be more inclusive of all women. Because
yeah, the women are Ezers whether they're married or not.
Yeah.
And that part of what I love about the term is that, you know, I can think of a 7th grade girl at school reaching out to a classmate who's being left out, and she's being Ezer, reaching out to someone who has not been welcomed.
Yeah.
All the way to the, you know, 88-year-old bedridden woman who spends her day praying for her family, her pastor, her friends, her church. That the term Ezer isn't describing a season of our life, but it's describing a way we can live throughout our entire life.
Right.
As a believer.
Yes. Well, and it's we have this tendency to kind of huddle together in our roles almost, you know, and you know, the singles huddle together and the young marrieds, and then, you know, we've got all these programs at church, you know, where you kind of segregate everybody, and young moms, empty nesters, you know, older women, you know,
right.
And we do such a great disservice to each other when we can only associate with each other within our roles, because a lot of times, you know, God will be calling us to stand next to somebody who maybe isn't in our particular group, let's say, but there's just so much opportunity there for us to reflect God's Ezer nature to other people.
Right. And that was one of my initial frustrations as a young mom, was looking for a place where I could grow and understand God's word, and yet our church at the time, what I kept bumping up against was walking into Bible studies for young moms that was only about motherhood. And what I was hungry for was, I felt like if someone would teach me the Bible, then I could apply what I was learning in Scripture and be a better mom,
Yeah.
but then also be a better wife.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that it would transcend, that learning, that actually learning a text not based on my role, then I could apply it to all the different roles that I was playing.
Absolutely.
So that was what had been so impactful for me early in my journey, was finding a place where I sat under a woman who was teaching a variety of women in a bunch of different age categories, a bunch of different life stages, some moms, some not moms yet, some empty nesters, grandmothers. It was a room full of all different kinds of women. And yet we were all able to take something away from the study because she wasn't teaching to us based on our current life stage.
Yeah.
So for me, that was my moment of, wow, I need to really think about how the church teaches women. And there are times where absolutely it is helpful for young mothers to come together, or for empty nesters to come together, or for retirees to come together. Absolutely, there's times where that's necessary and appropriate and encouraging. But if we do that exclusively, we really miss out on biblical teaching about older women teaching younger women.
Right. Yes. Well, and I feel like just having that undercurrent of just the word being in your life, it seeps out into everything else, and we are able to execute our roles so much better when we're grounded just in that identity of following Christ as a disciple. Also, this word is so strong too, and Christy mentions it. She says, Ezer is not a weak word, it is a strong word. A woman as an Ezer reflects God as an Ezer, as an ally, someone who is for you and one who brings strength. I talk a little bit about sometimes I think there have been times in my life where I've wondered, like, how strong am I allowed to be?
Oh, I think especially in today's culture, we better be really strong. I mean, but the strength that we bring is a strength that is the same kind of strength Christ reflected, which is a strength born in humility, right? Right. And when I think of strength, I think of bringing to people the word of the Lord, all those things, all the truths that we know God has given us. I don't think strength is necessarily a posture, or it's not how loud we speak. But I think strength, as we understand it biblically, is rooted in humility and is bringing what Christ would bring to a situation. And I just think about the potential impact that we all have. Everybody's strength maybe looks a little bit different. There's a quiet strength, there may be a more upfront strength, but when we're called by God into a certain place, I think the strength that we find is carrying it out and not second guessing ourselves, because I think a lot of us are, like you said, am I supposed to do this? What am I doing? What am I doing? But if we have the confidence in knowing what God's called us to do, and that comes from knowing His Word, then hopefully we can lean into that strength.
Well, it's also tied together, and I think we have to be in tune with what He's calling us to do in order to be able to confidently step out in strength, and not because we all want to please the Lord. Nobody wants to overstep and go outside of bounds. So I think, it is so much about just being rooted in the Word and what He's, and also like you're just hitting on, just making sure that our strength is always a reflection of His strength, and it is rooted in that, in a Christ-like strength. So I'm going to close with Christy's words. She says, a woman fulfills her Ezer calling as she brings everything she is, her personality, her wisdom, strengths, talents, passions, time, energy, and resources, and uses it to support, encourage, strengthen, and further the cause of the people in her life. That is a big calling.
It is a big calling. It is, yeah.
But it's a God-given calling. And I think that's really exciting for us to learn to live into. So thanks for being here.
You bet. Thank you.